The Unauthorized Version, Truth and Fiction in the Bible by Robin Lane Fox. Book review. So this is part of what I've been calling my scripted book reviews, in which I take a book review that I wrote years ago on my weblog and try to make a YouTube video out of it for whatever that may or may not be worth. This one's going to be a long one. The book in question, as the title suggests, is about the historical accuracy of the Bible. Where it's accurate and where it's not accurate as far as history goes. It's a huge subject. The book review I wrote of it was 10 pages once I printed it all out. And yeah, there's a lot to talk about, so we're going to be here for a while. Grab a cup of coffee and let's get into it. I should make a few disclaimers. The first one, of course, is nobody is obligated to watch these long and rambling videos. Second one is I fully expect this one to be long and rambling and to go into multiple videos. So the camera I'm using shuts off after 30 minutes. So if I'm going to do something longer than 30 minutes, I have to do it in multiple parts. And I fully expect this will go into multiple parts, so I'll try and link down below to the other parts once you finish this video. Now, I hate to make a very long video, a very long book review, even longer, but I feel like in order to give sense to my perspective on this book and talk about why I feel the way I do about it, I really have to give my background. So my background is growing up in a very religious part of America and having a background which is perhaps familiar to some of you who have grown up in certain parts of America and perhaps completely alien to people who may have grown up in other countries or in less religious areas. But we studied the Bible a lot when I was a child. I attended church, Sunday school, where we would hear the Bible stories, and also youth group nights on Wednesday night, where we would also have Bible study. In addition, at the family dinner table, we would read devotions every night after dinner, where we would read a Bible story and talk about it. Quite often the bedtime stories before we went to bed were Bible stories. And I went to private religious schools where the Bible was studied as a school subject. So we would study science, math, and then Bible. And it was a very thorough studying of the Bible. Although it did change a little bit as we got older. So from kindergarten to second grade, studying the Bible was story time. So we'd all sit down on the floor, teacher would get out her big posters or big pictures and tell the Bible stories using the posters. It was, if memory serves, a very thorough journey through the Bible. The only things that got left out in the second grade were the sexual stories. So we didn't talk about Judah and Tamar or the rape of Dinah or Absalom and his sister, you know, in any of those stories involving rape or sex or anything like that. Those we did not get into until middle school. But we got into everything else, I think, including the problematic stories in the Old Testament where God tells the Israelites to kill everyone, all the men, all the women, all the children in these Canaanite towns. And I remember, as anyone does who grew up in religious institutions, the discussions about this. You know, we children would be saying like, why? Why would God do that? And then the teacher would say, well, kids, you have to understand God needed to do this because of this and that or something or other. Now, I actually have extensive thoughts on this and the morality of it and perhaps the appropriateness of presenting it to children. But I'm going to skip on over all of that for now, because that's a huge subject, and in many ways it's a digression from what I want to talk about, which is maybe a more dispassionate look at the historical accuracy of the Bible. Other than to say, in spite of all those very problematic stories in the Old Testament and a few in the New Testament, in which God is ordering genocide, or seems to be a very vengeful God, I did not hate Bible study at school. In fact, I loved it. I was absolutely immersed in the stories. And then as we got older, from 3rd grade, we had our own Bibles. We were each given a Bible with our names on it, and we would read through the Bible stories and study it. I remember, I think it was 3rd or 4th grade, we had to memorize all the kings of Israel and Judah in order for a test, which I could not do now. One of those many things that's gone from the memory over the years, but had it memorized at one time. But yeah, general disclaimer. I'm not nearly as good in the Bible stories as I once was. My Sunday school days were a long ways behind me now. That are a long ways behind me now. But I had them. I had it all at one point. And I remember being absolutely fascinated by these stories. And partly maybe because I grew up in a sheltered environment, so these stories were some of the only ways I had access to stories with very interesting or violent content. But it just fascinated my imagination. The King David stories, I loved hearing the King David stories. I remember reading the comic book of the King David stories in pics and all the different adventures King David had. Fascinated my imaginations, these various empires, the Egyptian Empire and the Assyrian Empire and the Babylonian Empire and the Persian Empire. And then of course you get into the New Testament and there's the Roman Empire, and I remember my Sunday school teachers telling me about the Roman world. One of them said, the Romans had conquered the whole world at this stage, which of course was an exaggeration. What he meant was all the world that they cared about. But it wasn't much of an exaggeration. They had conquered all the parts of the world that they cared about. All of the Mediterranean was the Roman world at the time. And I had a teacher in 7th and 8th grade who was an amateur scholar and part-time archaeologist, who knew tons about ancient history and about church legend, and would weave that into the Bible stories. So, when we were learning about Paul and the stories in Acts, he would weave in stories about Nero and Nero's mother and all that stuff. And I think that my love of ancient history first developed from studying the Bible, and possibly my love of mythology, because I would later really get into Greek myths and mythology when I was a teenager. Although it's a classic chicken and the egg type problem, meaning did my love of Bible stories inspire my love of ancient history, or perhaps the fact that I was predisposed to like ancient history and myths made me enjoy the Bible stories more? I don't know, but at any rate, I absolutely loved Bible class at school. In spite of all those terrible stories and the lingering feelings you have about the genocidal God in the Old Testament, I was really fascinated by the narrative aspects of it. I was not interested in the non-narrative parts of the Bible. So, the book of Psalms or Paul's letters or stuff like that did not interest me. But in any of the narrative sections of the Bible, I loved. In high school, the religion classes turned more into theology classes. So we talked about, the problem of why do bad things happen to good people, or the problem of an all-powerful God and the problem of evil, and stuff like that. And that did not interest me nearly as much. I don't have a philosophical brain. And then I went to college, and I went to Calvin College, which is associated with the Dutch Calvinist community that I grew up in. And at that point, everyone was required to take 2 religion classes just because it's a religious school. And the first class was a survey of the Bible, going through, of course, all these stories that I knew backwards and forwards at this point, but adding some scholarship, which I had been completely unaware of, and which knocked me off my feet, to be quite honest. So, for example, things I remember learning in this religion class in Calvin College is that the book of Isaiah was not actually written by Isaiah, or at least not all of it. Scholars have separated into 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Isaiah, meaning that there are later prophets writing prophecies in this book that couldn't possibly have been written by the historical Isaiah for a variety of reasons. And that, you study the Bible your whole life, you go to Sunday school your whole life, and nobody ever bothers to tell you this. And you're like, what? What? These parts of Isaiah weren't even written by Isaiah? And the teachers were like, well, but it doesn't really matter because this was a common practice in the ancient world. Schools of prophets routinely wrote under the name of the head of the school. It's all inspired by God anyways. So we got through it, but then you get to the New Testament, and there are even bigger shocks in store. So the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were not written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The evidence is overwhelming that they came from a later period and a different community. And this is the type of thing that, if I had read this on some atheist article on the internet or something like that, I would have been like, well, of course the atheists are going to say that. True Christians wouldn't say that. But here I am in a conservative Christian institution being taught what they believe that the scholarship shows is that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John couldn't possibly have been written by the apostles. And then we get to the letters of Paul, and the evidence is overwhelming that Paul did not write 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. And the evidence is overwhelming that Peter, the apostle, did not write 1st and 2nd Peter. And again, if you're at a religious institution, they offer you ways out of this. So for the Gospels, they say, well, it doesn't really matter because if you look at the Gospels, they don't really claim to be written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John anyways. That's just older church traditions. And we're Protestant, so church tradition, we've never claimed that church tradition is infallible. And it's a little bit different for the letters of Paul, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, because those letters, especially 1st and 2nd Timothy, very explicitly claim to be written by Paul. I mean, 2nd Timothy especially is Paul writing what seems to be like his last will and testament, like, Timothy, bring me my coat, I feel the end is near, or something like that. But again, the teacher said, well, it doesn't really matter because in the ancient world, it was quite common for people who were in the same philosophical school to adopt this literary style as if they were writing in Paul's name. It was just something everybody did at the time, and it wasn't thought of as dishonest. So that was a shock to me. And it's something that over the years has stuck in my memory. The complete disconnect between what is known about the authorship of the Bible or the historical accuracy of the Bible at the scholarly level in conservative institutions, and how that never filters down to Sunday school. Now, I mean, to be fair, the average Sunday school teacher is a volunteer who may or may not know anything about the Bible. In fact, I remember when I got to be about 7th and 8th grade, figuring out that I knew more about the Bible than my Sunday school teachers did because of all the religious instruction I was receiving at the private school. So for example, I remember one day the Sunday school teacher said, well, you know, there's all different gospels, but they all give the same views of Christ. She said, for example, all 4 gospels have the birth of Jesus in them. And I raised my hand and I said, no, only Matthew and Luke have the birth of Jesus in the Gospels. And the Sunday school teacher was like, oh, I didn't know that. And other things. Sorry, that's a digression. The point being, the Sunday school teachers don't know much. But the pastor has been through seminary. They know what the scholarship is about the Bible, and I'm using my own anecdotal evidence at Calvin College, which is just one case, but I've since had the opportunity to talk to, since I've been out in the wider world, I've been able to talk to people who've been through other institutions and compare notes with people who grew up religious, and I believe this is fairly common, that the scholarship at most conservative or mainstream Protestant institutions is in line with this. The Gospels were not written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that the 1st and 2nd Timothy were not written by Paul. And yet I remember hearing sermons in which the preacher would talk about the letters of Paul when he was talking about 1st and 2nd Timothy. Or I remember the preacher in sermons, the pastor in sermons, referring to the Apostle Matthew or the Apostle John when we were reading through these books. And he must have known that wasn't right. It's been one of my pet peeves ever since. Is the disconnect between what is known at Protestant institutions and the disconnect between how that does not get down to the people going to church. Okay, so all of that is a long way of giving my background, and that background is going to inform how I look at this book, so hopefully it's been worth it. I have, over the years, become an unbeliever in Christianity. I classify myself as an agnostic, and the reasons for that are myriad. It would take several hours to get into all 500 reasons why I've found the Christian faith dissatisfying over the years. Definitely the historical accuracy problems with the Bible are one of them, but they're one of many. And then I've not been to Sunday school in years. I've been removed from that religious community, and I haven't really been keeping up with my Bible stories. They're all a little bit faded in my memory as something I used to know or something I used to study. But every now and again, I'll get a bit nostalgic for these stories. Something will trigger the memory, and I'll be like, oh yeah, remember those stories of King David? Boy, weren't those bizarre? I mean, did he really go and fight for the Philistines for a while? Or was that a real story? Am I misremembering this stuff? And all those fascinating stories in the Old Testament and some of them in the New Testament. And I had a few things that a few years ago pushed me to want to explore more about what the truth behind these Bible stories is. I mentioned in a video I did in my television addiction series, talking about the TV show that came out about King David, Kings, or actually there was a couple of TV shows that attempted to retell the King David story. And even though the TV shows themselves had their flaws, getting into them again reminded me about how fascinated I used to be about these King David stories. And I thought, I should really go back and reread these King David stories again. And then I thought to myself, you know what? I don't want to just reread these King David stories. I want to read a history of King David. A scholar who's going through the Bible and who's talking about what is supported by archaeology, what is supported by history, what scholars think actually happened with the King David stories. Wouldn't that be fascinating? And that led me to the bookstore to look for a book on the historical accuracy of the Bible. Now, at this time, I was living in Cambodia. So it's not like there was a Barnes & Noble nearby where I could rock up to. But in Phnom Penh, there were actually fairly good used bookstores, which covered... There were big expat communities living in Phnom Penh. And these bookstores actually had a fairly big religious section, possibly because of all the religious NGOs or all the missionaries that were operating in Cambodia or in Phnom Penh. So it was a little bit of a roll of the dice, but it wasn't completely out of the question that I might find something along these lines. And I walked into the bookstore and I found this book, and it's about the history, the historical accuracy of the Bible. It's exactly what I was looking for. It was published in 1991. So it's not exactly hot off the presses, and it would be interesting to see what an updated version of this would look like, because I think there's been advances in archaeology since then, although I'm not really an expert on this. But it's an impressive book nonetheless. I don't think it's still currently in print, but it was well reviewed at the time, and I'm sure you could find copies easily enough at used bookstores, in your library, going to Amazon.com, etc. I had, as I will get into this in my review, any number of problems with it. And yet, I learned so much fascinating information from it. So, for those reasons, I would recommend this book with some caution. It has some frustrations, but I would definitely recommend it if you're at all interested in this book. While I was reading this book, actually, I felt like I was learning so much fascinating stuff about the truth behind what was in the Bible, and started to get into conversations with coworkers about it. And of course, it's always dangerous to bring up religion at work, but I had a couple coworkers who were like-minded, people who had also come from religious backgrounds and had since distanced themselves from it, and were also kind of nerdy like me and interested in these details. And one of my coworkers was saying, while I was telling him all about this book, he said to me, "You should listen to the Yale Courses lecture series by Dale Martin on the New Testament." And he brought me a copy of them. He brought me a copy on USB, but these are all freely available on the internet. I've actually done videos talking about it before, about a year ago now on this channel. But this was my introduction to those series. This was how I first found out about them. The Dale Martin lecture series on the New Testament by Yale University, and then the Christine Hayes lectures on the Old Testament. So I downloaded all the episodes, I listened to all the episodes, and I found them absolutely fascinating. And I hate to say it, but I enjoyed those Yale lecture courses more than I enjoyed this book I'm currently reviewing, the Unauthorized version by Robin Lane Fox. In terms of scratching the itch I wanted scratched, which is a historical overview of the stories in the Bible, going through them in a chronological fashion, and chronological meaning in terms of the internal chronology of the Bible, the order the stories are meant to be read in, and then commenting along the way on what the scholarship shows about where these stories come from and how accurate they are. The Yale lecture series, especially the ones Christine Hayes on the Old Testament, absolutely fascinating, does a much better job on it. And I'm not going to talk about, I've talked about those in separate videos. I had one reviewing Christine Hayes on the Old Testament and a different video reviewing Dale Martin on the New Testament. So for the purposes of this book review, I'm only going to talk about them insofar as they supplement the unauthorized version by Robin Lane Fox. But I do wholeheartedly recommend them. And in spite of the fact that I said I liked them more than the Robin Lane Fox book, what I really mean to say is, if you want to do a study project and you're curious about the subject and you really want to get into it, do both of them. Order the unauthorized version off of Amazon, read that, and then listen to the Yale University Open Lecture Series while you're listening to it, because they complement each other very well. There are things there are places where they line up exactly, and then there are places where they have differing views, and it's interesting to see where they line up exactly and where they have differing views. But let me talk about the unauthorized version by Robin Lane Fox. I'll be honest, I don't like the title here, the unauthorized version, because it makes it sound like it's the type of tabloid supermarket conspiracy that you would find in being sold in a grocery store or something like that. And it's especially dangerous because there's so much misinformation written about the Bible from all sides. There's religious fundamentalists who are pursuing a very faith-driven view of biblical scholarship, where it's all 100% reliable and anybody who tries to be skeptical at all is wrong. There's also angry atheists like Christopher Hitchens who are just out to attack the Bible and who in the process get a lot of his scholarship wrong, and I've gone into that when I reviewed Christopher Hitchens' books. There's also these crazy New Age people, or the Dan Brown conspiracy theorists. There's just a lot of crackpot stuff written about the Bible. So you've got to be careful when you're getting into a book like this about is it written by a genuine scholar who knows what he's doing. And this book is, I think. Robin Lane Fox, you can Google him or look up his bio on Wikipedia. He is a bona fide scholar. He was a reader at Oxford. He's got all the credentials. He's a scholar in classist in the academic sense, meaning the study of Rome and Greece and ancient history. He is not a biblical scholar. And arguably that will come up a little bit later in the book when we're looking at places where his interpretation differs from the biblical scholar. I mean, obviously there's a lot of overlap between ancient history and Bible studies because the Bible is part of ancient history. And yet if you're a biblical scholar, it means that you're not spending if you're an ancient history scholar, it means that you're not spending your whole life poring over these biblical texts and looking for the little clues in the Greek or Hebrew language that might tell you something about the authorship, which might be an important point later when we come back to where Robin Fox diverges from the field a bit in his assessment of the authorship of the Gospels. I am just about to run out of time here, so I'm going to have to stop the video here, and I'm going to come back and film some more parts later because we have barely scratched the surface of what's in this book. Sorry for rambling so much, but if you find this interesting and you want to continue, come back for the next video.